Arendt tells a story, right? And the story goes like this. In 1906, we have the beginnings of the politics of denaturalization, and these are mostly individual cases. So in the United States, it's the first country to create a legalized procedure for denaturalization. It's basically based on fraud. If you lie in your applications, you can be denaturalized if it's discovered. Great Britain follows in 1914. And then from 1914 till 1933, we see a series of new laws. 1915, a French law allows denaturalization of naturalized citizens of enemy origin. In 1919, the Heimatlosen, produced by peace treaties and the break of Austria-Hungary, lead to denaturalization laws. In 1922, Belgium canceled naturalization of those who committed anti-national acts, etc. I won't go through them all. But almost every country in Europe passes laws for denaturalization. And Arendt comments on this and says, the behavior of these governments may appear today to be the natural consequences of civil war. They said, you have to understand, this was, if citizens committed treason, there was a sense, why not denaturalize them? But then she continues, but at the time, mass denaturalizations were something entirely new and unforeseen. The second phase of her story is moving from individual denaturalizations of people for committing treasonous acts to mass denaturalizations. And the two prime examples here are the 1933 laws in Nazi Germany, canceling Jewish citizenship for naturalized Germans of Jewish origin, and then the 1935 Nuremberg laws, and then the 1936 laws in Greece, which canceled all naturalizations of Armenian refugees. It is these mass denaturalizations that created statelessness, the newest mass phenomenon in contemporary history, and the most symptomatic group of refugees in contemporary politics. And Arendt here makes this claim that you can't distinguish refugees from stateless peoples, because even though there may be a de jure, a legal distinction on a factual basis, they are basically the same thing. For all practical purposes, she says, statelessness and refugees are the same. And every political event now, she says, leads to the increase in factual refugees or stateless people. This leads to the famous paradox. There's many paradoxes that she talks about, but one famous paradox is that at the very moment when you're excluded from a polity and your civil rights, that is the moment when you should therefore be able to claim your human rights outside of the state. That is when the refugees came to see themselves as rightless, as people who simply had no rights. And this is where Arendt turns to Burke and says, there's something right in Burke, that really to have rights means to be a member of a political community. And this is where she then first articulates this idea of what she calls the right to have rights. And I want to say just one or two things about that. The right to have rights for Hannah Arendt is the only human right she recognizes, right? The right to life is not a human right, and the right to food for her is not a human right. Why not? Well, first of all, because those are rights that humans share with animals. They're not particularly human. But secondly, because they're not, for her, what makes us human. Humans die, and in fact, to be human, you may have to die memorably or meaningfully. You may have to martyr yourself. And Arendt takes this very seriously. She thinks human life exists to be meaningful, and that's what separates it from animal life, to be remembered and memorable. The Sudanese man that Carrie talked about in her opening, who says, I lost my rights and my dignity when I became a refugee in Berlin, is, I think, an illustration of this. For Arendt, to be a human being, to have rights, is to be part of a community in which you can act and speak in public in a meaningful way, where you can be killed because what you say matters and what you do matters, because you can be imprisoned where what you say and do matters. And for her, human rights means in the end nothing if not the right to have rights, the right to claim membership in a political community. The rise of rightless people, what she calls the scum of the earth, which she saw herself to be part of, and the denaturalizations and the masses of these denaturalizations, is for her one of the central contributors to the rise of totalitarianism and is a marker of totalitarianism. She writes, "One is almost tempted to measure the degree of totalitarian infection by the extent to which the concerned governments use their sovereign right of denaturalization. The more you see denaturalization, the more you see refugees, the more you see stateless and rightless people, the closer we are to totalitarian infection." And this comes from the fact that sovereignty in the nation state was always the right to control immigration and naturalize borders. Sovereignty, therefore, implies above all else, she writes, quote, "control of immigration, naturalization, national expulsion." And thus, the rights of the rightless conflict with sovereignty and lead the sovereign to seek to become totalitarian. Thank you. There are four impacts that she says the rise of the stateless lead to and connect to totalitarianism. One is the abolition of the right of asylum, which Arendt talked about, so I'll skip that. And the second, and this is the one that I think is the most controversial, so I'll actually, if I like to do that, spend some time on it, is that she says there's simply no solution to the refugee stateless problem. She says it was impossible to get rid of them or transform them into nationals of the country of refuge. There were too many of them. There are only two ways, she says, that the problem can be solved: repatriation or naturalization. Repatriation failed because you couldn't send them back. And naturalization failed for the same reason that asylum was abandoned. It was set up for individuals, small numbers, exiles, exceptions. The whole process, she wrote, quote, broke down when it became a question of handling mass applications. And here, I think a lot of what Patrice said about the evolution of German law, I think was incredibly important. And she said there's a great worry, she writes, that the smallest positive gesture, namely welcoming of refugees, might encourage countries to get rid of their unwanted people, and that many might emigrate who would otherwise remain in their countries under serious disabilities. This, of course, is what many people have criticized Europe for, opening the borders, and thus creating this idea that if you can risk your life to get here, then we'll save you. But you should first risk your life to do it, which has certainly exacerbated one aspect of the crisis. Finally, the third and most important consequence of the rise of refugees is the emergence of camps. And what Arendt says is because both naturalization and repatriation don't work, the only real solution is the rise of camps. The only, quote, the only practical substitute for a non-existent homeland was an internment camp. Indeed, as early as the 30s, this was the only country the world had to offer the stateless. Right? Now, I know in Germany we've repatriated 1 million people. In the United States, not mostly people from the same part of the world, but we do repatriate lots of people. But there are still something like 60 million people in camps around the world today, as far as I understand it. And in camps, people become governed by police, and the police become a quasi-government. And this was the beginning of what Arendt saw as totalitarianism. The rise of camp governance, the rise of refugees in camps. And she calls this the curse that bears the germ of a deadly sickness for nation states. I'll just conclude with 3 lessons that I think we can take from Hannah Arendt. One is that if Europe and the West are going to insist on the morality of not abandoning refugees, which I certainly agree with, they will have to prevent the upsurge of unmanageable numbers of refugees, which means military intervention. The West can't have it both ways. Second, legalistic approaches, guarantees of rights, may work in normal circumstances, but they won't work in the face of millions of refugees, as Patrice said. For Arendt, law and constitutional protections will always fail when power emerges that opposes those protections, as we're seeing throughout the world, including in the United States as well. And then third and finally, is that Arendt says that the existence of refugees makes us aware of a right to have rights, a right to live in a political community, to speak in ways that matter. But she then cites the next sentence, which no one ever quotes. It's not at all certain that such a right exists or can be guaranteed or made to exist. If we will make that right, the right to have rights, come to exist, we really have a choice between assimilation, camps, or some third way. And there's where I thought what Orwa was leading to in his talk was most meaningful. The refugees have to act organized politically, as conscious pariahs, as refugees, as people who don't belong. Arendt saw the refugees in this way as the vanguard for the creation of a new political structure outside of the nation-state system. That's what she spent her life fighting for. New federal, local, political, organized structures that, in a sense, overcame states. And she thought that was the only way forward in which a just incorporation of the rightless could emerge in the future. And that's what she hoped the refugees would help lead us towards.